Ciao, welcome to Celebrating Culture. In this episode, we're going to feature some of the great Sicilian musicians and also provide a sample of the history of Sicilian music and its contributions to America. If you've ever attended a Sicilian wedding, you've seen Sicilians running around looking crazy. It's called the tarantella dance. From the word tarantella, we get tarantula. The tarantula spider's venom, as we all know, is poisonous. And when you see Sicilians doing this dance at a wedding, you'll see the circle spinning around and they all rush to the center, almost like a spider going after its prey. It was rumored that a tarantula bite would make you go crazy, and the cure was to work up a sweat. So all this physical activity would help you get rid of the venom of that tarantula spider. However, the Romans didn't like it, and in 186 BC, they actually banned it. It was brought back around the 15th century, and today, throughout Louisiana, it's a staple of a wedding, and it's seen more as a courtship and a dance between a man and a woman. Sicilian songstress Michela Musolino will explain Sicilian music history and its connection to the U.S. Marine Band in the early 1800s. And we're going to look at the role of the U.S. Marine Band. Master Sergeant Brad Rehrig of New Orleans will talk about the role of 4 Sicilians who became directors of the Marine Band in the 1800s. Jazz band leader David Hansen and artist George Schmidt will talk to us about Nick LaRocca and the original Dixieland Jazz Band, and how music that was known in New Orleans as Jass, J-A-S-S, in 1916 would become J-A-Z-Z, Jazz, in New York by 1917. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Our news spent 5 years touring Louisiana. We've interviewed countless numbers of people. The people that make it happen, that put on Mardi Gras, the chefs, the artists, the backbone of Louisiana. We've taken those interviews and made a show called Celebrating Culture. But we've also taken those interviews and put them in a tour app, New Orleans Insider Tours. To download the apps, all you have to do is point your phone at the flow code in the camera mode. Once you have the app downloaded, you'll have access to putting together the best game plan to experience in Louisiana. You can start with Little Palermo, which is 50 points of interest on the Italian community, and then go to Statue Stories and Spirits, over 150 stops in the French Quarter and CBD. Where to dine in New Orleans, what rooftop bars give you the best view, how to see the Gulf of Mexico from the coastal towns, driving up to the Bonnie and Clyde Museum near Shreveport, or up to Vicksburg. New Orleans and Louisiana are must-see for everyone, and there's so much to see. So we hope you enjoy it, and as we say here, let the good times roll. Hi, welcome back to Celebrating Culture. We're coming to you today from West End in New Orleans, and West End is known for its jazz. This is where Louis Armstrong wrote the song West End Blues. It has a great history with jazz, and I'm with David Hansen, and David is a great jazz musician.
Hey Charles, how are you?
Great, David. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
David, I understand you actually have a collection of jazz music and memorabilia that you have donated.
It's now at the Historic New Orleans Collection. I purchased a big band library that had 5 to 6 big band leaders, all of their music dating back to the 1890s.
That is on Royal Street, that collection,
Yes.
and close to there is the Opera House.
The Opera House, one of the hotbeds of early music in New Orleans.
David, the Opera House is a great place to start with our story on Nick LaRocca. He actually started as an electrician there, playing music on the side, and that's where he would hear opera at night and learn how to put that into his jazz music. So tell me the story about Nick's dad, 1876.
Okay, so if we go back in time, when Nick is a youth, 10, 11, 12 years old, he's picking up a cornet. That cornet belonged to his father. His father was a cobbler, made handmade shoes. And they had a shop in the 2000 block of Magazine Street. That's where Nick grew up. Nick started to play the cornet. And from what I understand, his dad took the cornet from him, put it on the ground and stomped on it.
On the cornet that he actually brought over from Sicily. His dad's making extra money playing music on the side from being a cobbler.
Well, he's got a strong belief and a strong feeling that musicians are bums. And you are going to be a doctor, is what Nick LaRocca was told. And so Nick, I'm an adolescent, I'm 10, 11, 12 years old. He went and found another cornet. The story might be that his mother helped him buy it. She kept it hidden from the dad. So they had an outhouse. From what I understand, there might have been a compartment for toilet paper or something built into the outhouse, but he hid the cornet in the outhouse and he would go and practice out there. And then he was running around town as well, looking at to get hired by Papa Jack Lane.
Papa Jack Lane.
Yes.
Tell me about him.
Papa Jack Lane was a drummer, but he was also a band leader. And he was probably the most prominent band leader from the 1890s through the 1910s. He had a wagon. He lived over in the Marigny, just over on the other side of the French Quarter. He would drive his wagon over to Exchange Alley. Musicians would congregate there and hang out waiting for the band leaders to come by and offer them gigs to go and play. Papa Jack Lane would come by and say, I need trumpet, cornet, saxophone, saxophone, violin at this address. He would organize all of the events.
And there's a fight coming to town. Nick LaRocca is in that wagon one day. George Schmidt has a painting in his gallery of Papa Jack Lane's wagon with Nick LaRocca playing trumpet on the back of the wagon.
Okay.
I'm here with someone who paints culture, the history of culture. George Schmidt has been on Julia Street since 1976, and his paintings reflect carnival and Mardi Gras and jazz. George, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
So George, this painting with Nick LaRocca, I mean, this is a great piece when you walk in your store. What am I seeing here?
What you're looking at is an actual event that took place in December of 1915. There was a prize fight. There was a band playing on Canal Street to ballyhoo the prize fight because the tickets were on sale at the corner here at Canal and Royal. This fellow over here, Harry James, was here from Chicago for the prize fight. He heard this band playing, and then when they finished, he went up to Jack Lane, Papa Lane, who was on the drums. He says, "Man, I've never heard music like this before. I'd like to bring your band to Chicago." He said, "I can't. I gotta be here for Mardi Gras." But talk to Nick on the cornet. So he went and talked to Nick, and Nick said, "Yeah, come hear my band tonight at the Haymarket Cafe." And so he went and heard them, hired the band. They went to Chicago, and 2 years later, in 1917, made the first jazz record in New York for Victor. That's why I call it the discovery of the first jazz band.
He records Tiger Rag.
Tiger Rag was probably the most popular record. Now, LaRocca is in Chicago at that man's club, and it's a late night club. They're playing their music, and there's a vaudevillian who jumps up on a table and says, "Oh boys, Jass that music." And LaRocca says, that's what we're gonna call it, Jass, the Jazz Band.
J-A-S-S.
J-A-S-S. Now the problem was, what LaRocca says, well, the kids were going around crossing the J out, so it became the Ass Band. So he had to respell it, because sometimes they spell it J-A-S-Z. Well, it finally ends up being J-A-Z-Z. Now the thing is, it becomes so popular as a term that it completely supersedes jazz as a word in the dictionary.
I saw a clip in the Times-Picayune that they were upset in New Orleans because J-A-S-S was considered a vulgar word.
Absolutely.
Why is the jazz music, and therefore the jazz band? As well ask, why is the dime novel or the grease-dripping donut? All are manifestations of a low-streaking man's tastes that has not yet come out in civilization's wash. It behooves us to be last to accept this atrocity in polite society, and where it has crept in, we should make it a point of civic honor to suppress it. Its musical value is nil, and its possibilities of harm are great.
So we got a little bit of a problem. These guys are raucous. They're cutting up. They're having hit after hit. They have extremely successful hits over the next 6 years. Between September and November of 1917, Aeolian Records records them and changes the band name to J-A-Z-Z. Victor Records says, we're going to record you and you can record your own original song. So they do Livery Stable Blues and Dixie Jazz Band One Step.
The Victor Company pays transportation, brings the Dixieland Band to its New York studios.
Okay, boys, get ready.
First selections, the Dixieland's own compositions become popular overnight and put a new word, jazz, into the nation's vocabulary. The band becomes a top-notch Broadway attraction. But when every small orchestra calls itself a jazz band, the Dixieland Band sinks into obscurity as the name jazz becomes synonymous with cheap music.
And now all of a sudden we've got 5 guys that are American citizens. They were all born in the US, immigrant backgrounds, and they've got a 1 million seller record.
They knew how to imitate animal sounds with their instruments.
Yes, you had automobiles, but you still had horse and buggy. You still had livery stables. While they were in New York, they even did a performance at the New York Zoo.
Now, the jazz era also coincides with World War I. They're sending gramophones with albums on it to the troops, the warming huts overseas. And right after that, though, Nick goes to Europe.
Yes, indeed. In 1919, he takes the entire band on board the Adriatic, and they sail over to Europe, and they perform in London, and they're a huge success. They perform at the Crystal Palace.
They perform for the Queen.
They do perform for the royal family. They end up leaving in 1919 back to New York City.
So they also play at the USO halls. There's a lot of letters that servicemen have written thanking them for playing.
Friends, the War Hospital Entertainment Association wishes to thank you sincerely for your efforts last evening in presenting your act for the boys at the Columbia-based hospital. I assure you your efforts were heartily appreciated by all, and we would like to have you again this coming Friday evening.
You went back to his hometown, I understand.
We did. I get a call out of the blue from this guy in Italy, and he says, we're doing a Nick LaRocca, Louis Armstrong tribute concert in Sala Peruta. That's the hometown to Jimmy's grandfather, or Nick LaRocca's father. They brought us over, and we did an outside performance in Partana in a castle, and it was absolutely stunning. And we've been back 3 times to Sicily.
There are a couple more busts like this around the world.
Yes, I think they had 3 made. There is one of these busts in Sala Peruta at the Nick LaRocca Cultural Arts Center. In Sala Peruta, we had the mayor, we had Jimmy LaRocca, myself, and a whole entourage of jazz aficionados that are trying to keep this history and music moving forward.
Besides the bust of Nick that's in Sala Peruta, this bust here is actually at the American Italian Cultural Center in New Orleans, which has an exhibit to Italians in music, including Nick and Louis Prima. And there is an historic marker to LaRocca, Prima, and Cosimo Matassa at the Jazz Museum in the Little Palermo area of the French Quarter. David, I really want to thank you for being on the
thanks,
show.
Charles.
And if someone wants to find you, what is your website?
You can go to ODJB.com. If they're interested in other things that I'm doing, NewOrleansJazz.com.
You can hear David playing at Houston's a lot of times. I go there, you're not every night, but your band is there every night.
7 nights a week for over 17 years.
And stay tuned, we'll be right back with more Celebrating Culture. Celebrating Cultures organized the content from our show into an app called New Orleans Insider Tours. Download the app to see views of the New Orleans skyline from various rooftop bars around the city. Go up to Rosie's on the Roof. It gives you a great perspective of the city. New Orleans has a tremendous amount to offer, but leaving the city and exploring Louisiana is a must. If you'd like to enjoy the coast of Louisiana, go down to Delacroix. If you'd like to know the history of the river, go up to the Great River Road Museum in Darrow. Poverty Point is located between Monroe and Tallulah, Louisiana, and is one of 23 World Heritage Sites in America. Hi, welcome back to Celebrating Culture. We're here today at the Brick Oven Cafe in Kenner, Louisiana, and I'm with Michela Musolino. Michela is a Sicilian songstress, and you've traveled the world, really, Italy, America, all over the place. Your knowledge of Sicilian music history is just overwhelming to me.
Thanks
Welcome.
for having me. Thanks. You know, anytime I get a chance to talk about Sicilian music, I'm there. I'm very happy to do it.
I think you were saying we could go back to about 470 BC.
Yes. There is what we call, we would say the filo conduttore, or the continuing line that shows that Sicily always had a unique body of music. So the first song that was documented in Sicily, it was the first Pythian ode, and it was written by Pindar in 470 BC. It was written in honor of Hiron, who is the tyrant of Syracuse, and it was a victory ode. It was a composition that was meant to be sung and danced in honor of the victories that they had over invaders coming into Sicily.
Sicily, when you tour it in Agrigento, the temples there go back to this era.
The temples, if you notice, are typically built with the backdrop of the stage being the sea. We look at that and we say, well, ancient people love beauty, but there was a darker reason for that. They were always worried about invasions. So even in their moments of recreation, they had to still think about protecting themselves and they had to still be vigilant. So that's why they would put their theaters so that they could always see and watch the coast to make sure that they weren't being invaded. They could never let down their guards and just enjoy something.
Sicily becomes a fishing place. They're also dealing with pirates.
Yes. Sicily, because it's a strategic location in the Mediterranean, it's centrally located, it's always been abundant with resources. So it was a great destination for pirates since antiquity.
New Orleans has a large Ustican population, and I understand that in 1762, a whole city of Ustica was taken one night.
In fact, they were moved there from the island of Lipari. I believe they were moved there to protect them, but they were kidnapped anyway, and they were held ransom for a number of years.
You had a relative
Yes.
that was actually part of this.
My grandfather came from a town called Borgetto in the Provincia di Palermo, and he came from a family of merchants. It was a situation where the merchant was going on a voyage, and his son was an adolescent, and he thought it'd be wonderful to start the son on this life and acquaint him with the sea, so he took his son with him, but their ships were captured, and he and his son were held for ransom, and the ransom note was sent to his wife, and she was given a choice. You could have your husband, or you could have your son, but you can't have both. So she made the choice to have her son returned to her because she felt, well, my husband's an adult, he can handle himself. My son is young, he needs to have his life ahead of him. And the story is that he came back and he was never right. We would consider it like what they call the post-traumatic stress disorder. I can't imagine how anyone in Sicily survived that.
I was reading from the U.S. War Department, and they talk about a man in Catania running into town demanding the governor do something because his wife and son were kidnapped.
In the song that I sing, you can hear the voices of the sailors at night crying out because they're being led away in chains.
So by 1804, Sicily's already at war with Libya and Tunisia. We call it the Barbary Coast, but those are the four countries: Algiers, Morocco. Those four countries are the Barbary Coast.
Tunisia and Libya, yeah.
And then the United States gets involved because the United States has sailors starting to be captured when they're in the Mediterranean.
Yep.
So Thomas Jefferson gets into this war.
The Kingdom of the Two Sicilies was a strong naval power. So we asked them for military support, and they let us use their ports. They let us use Palermo and Siracusa. Where we're going this we're going to wind up in Catania because Catania was used as a port for recreation. So they would have dances, they would have concerts, they would have different performances all around music. So when Thomas Jefferson wanted to establish the Marine Band, he really believed that the musicians from Italy were more refined. It was better music. He had had an Italian violin teacher. He'd spent some time actually in northern Italy years prior, and he was acquainted with Italian-style music. So when Thomas Jefferson was looking for musicians, he sent John Hall to Catania, and he found this band. It was the Carusi Band, and he paid the musicians and their families, their wives, to come to the U.S. to be part of the Marine Band, but they had to be enlisted. So these were not just musicians, they were actually enlisted as soldiers. It was a little bit of a surprise for them because they saw some action before they got to the U.S. From that original group of Sicilians from Catania. One of those musicians was a 12-year-old boy. He'd come with his father, and the young man's name was Venerando Pulizzi, and he stayed in the band for 22 years, and he eventually rose up to the ranks of the director of the Marine Band. But that triggered this Italian invasion of musicians because eventually we would have 4 directors of the Marine Band, including Venerando Pulizzi.
We actually were able to interview the director of the Marine Band here in New Orleans. I'm here with Master Sergeant Brad Rehrig, and Brad is the director of the Marine Band Reserve Band in New Orleans. And what's great about them is they're actually active duty Marines, so they could be called to action. They're also great musicians. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
America's first ally is Sicily. That goes back to the Barbary Coast Wars, and I believe like 19 Sicilians come back to America.
One of them was a very young man that ended up being the leader, Pulizzi, and he was only 12 years old when he was enlisted into the Marine Band. From what I see in my experience at 12 years old, I don't think there's a way anybody could make it in the Marine Band or the Marine Corps at that age. Back in the 1800s, he was 12. He became a fife major about 10 years later, and then eventually was actually promoted and asked to be the leader of the Marine Band.
How many years did he spend?
He had 47 years of service. I'm currently at 21 years of service, so I'm not even halfway to his amount of service, which is very intriguing to me. That's a lot for your body to go through, I can tell you that. In addition to being a musician, when he was done being the leader of the Marine Band, he took maybe a couple months off and decided he loved the Marine Corps and I'm going to join. Between his service as a regular Marine and a musician, it all equaled 47 years.
And there was another gentleman, Salvador Catalano, who I think partnered with Decatur, where they sailed the ship into Tripoli.
That is correct.
So the Sicilians were working hand in hand, not only to provide musicians, but also soldiers.
Decatur, as we know, Decatur Street in New Orleans, he sailed into Tripoli to retake and destroy the Philadelphia, which was a warship by America that was taken and captured by the pirates. He came up with a plan and sailed in there, and he took it out of enemy hands. Decatur was the first international war hero in America.
The opening of the hymn, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli.
Those lines go way back in our history. It goes to the Battle of Chapultepec, where we get the blood stripe. And the NCOs, E4 and above, and all of our Marine officers wear a red stripe on our blue trousers that symbolizes the blood shed at the Battle of Chapultepec.
And that was the Mexican-American War.
Yes. Just with those two lines, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, it shows that in just 2 short sentences, we have covered almost half of the world, and we travel anywhere. That's the way I interpret that.
Michela, you're performing across the country now, California, Florida, the Carolinas. If someone wants to reach you to perform at their event or get your music, how do they do that?
They would go to my website, michelamusolino.com.
Michela, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to thank everyone at Brick Oven Cafe for letting us use their facility here. Great pizzas, great pastas. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of Celebrating Culture. Hi, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Celebrating Culture. On News has interviewed hundreds of people and produced dozens of episodes for local broadcasting of awesome people doing great things to inspire us all. If you'd like to watch a specific interview, please visit our YouTube channel and subscribe. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Celebrating Culture and have a better appreciation the next time you hear Tiger Rag being played by the LSU Band. The original Dixieland Jazz Band played great music at a perfect time.
And as applauding swing fans stretch the one-night stand into many, it is settled that today's swing is only yesterday's jazz, which the Dixieland Band originated in New Orleans 20 years ago.
Marconi's radio allowed you to sit at home and listen to it. The gramophone allowed you to travel with it. And during World War I, U.S. troops were playing jazz in Europe, and as they came back, they brought jazz with them. Jazz spread across the country. When Nick LaRocca arrived in New York in 1917, Jimmy Durante was actually playing at the Alamo in Harlem, which is right above the Apollo Theater. Durante played ragtime, and when he heard jazz, he asked LaRocca to teach it to him. Jimmy Durante, with Nick LaRocca's help, would create Durante's Jazz Band. And with LaRocca's help recruiting New Orleanians to come up and play in Harlem, we can see the migration from New Orleans to Harlem of jazz. Later in the 1930s, when Louis Prima had moved to New York, he was playing with Jimmy Durante. Louis brought jazz and swing with him. So New Orleans and New York, jazz, swing, we have a strong connection. By 1936, the William Morris Agency wanted to bring back the original Dixieland Jazz Band, and a March of Times film was done showing the recreation of the original Dixieland Jazz Band. And although one critic, George Fraser, praised those great head men when they reformed, another critic, Marshall Stearns, was not so nice. This prompted a stern response from Nick LaRocca. However, by 1956, he and Stearns had made up, and in fact, in Stearns' book, The Story of Jazz, he praises the Dixieland Jazz Band for making jazz a household word. In the last century, Tiger Rag has been played by hundreds of bands. However, there's something special about the way the ODJB played it. In Louis Armstrong's second book, Satchmo, My Life in New Orleans, he describes buying the original Dixieland Jazz Band's recordings of Tiger Rag and writes, "Between you and me, it's still the best." In Armstrong's first book, Swing That Music, he wrote, "The Dixieland Band changed everything. Jazz has gone east and made good, and LaRocca really took it there and first put it across. He made an easier road for all the others who were soon to come." Today, jazz festivals are all around the world, and one of the best is New Orleans. And I really want to encourage you to come down to New Orleans and experience our Jazz and Heritage Festival. If you'd like to see the full interviews with Michela and David, please visit our YouTube channel, awe.news. Celebrating Culture is brought to you by AWE News. AWE News also produces New Orleans Insider Tours, which are 10 self-guided tours of New Orleans and Louisiana. If you want to enjoy oysters raised a new way off bottom, stop by Dickie Brennan's Bourbon House. If you want to enjoy charbroiled oysters, stop by Drago's.